Hi, I'm Faith Roswell and I teach psychological self-defense, and the one thing that's stopping me from doing major long-form videos about it and taking my workshops on the road is the fact that I'm terrified of talking on camera. So I decided this year I'm going to face my fear no matter what. So I had a whole video planned out about the Victorian muscle woman who helped solve a crime, and then I found a meme that came up on my Facebook, and it said, without any kind of source at all or any proof, in this day and age, 73% of people are more likely to post to social media than call the police if they see a crime in place. Now, that sounds disturbingly plausible. I don't think that's because people are more likely to just watch a crime because they think the world is their personal TV screen. I think it's a combination of mistrust of the law and the fact that social media gets things done. Look at Don't Fuck With Cats. Look at the woman that managed to track down the absent husband. Except I'm now already talking as though this thing is a proven fact. I'm analysing it as if it is a proven fact. It's not. But it's very, very shareable, isn't it? So that's why today what I'm going to be talking about is 3 lies that we all still believe. Just want to mention this case does contain a very brief couple of mentions of rape and an attack. If you don't want to hear about that, I'll put timestamps in here. In 1964, 38 people should feel very, very guilty because they sat there in their rooms in their cosy houses and watched a woman get stabbed to death, and they said nothing. No one called the police. And not only did this woman get stabbed to death, the killer came back to her twice. She was attacked a total of 3 times in this doorway. And some people closed their curtains and turned their music up. The murder originally was reported in the papers, but it was this tiny little segment. You know, people don't care about just a random act of violence. People know about that. They're jaded. It's New York. But 2 weeks later, when the article came out about the 38 people that did nothing, it blew up. It went viral. And this is before being viral even happened, because it was 1964. But this case, this horror, has been in the public consciousness. It is quoted in psychology textbooks still, even after all this time. So what did happen? And how did we get it so wrong? Well, it started with a lunch, and it was a lunch between the editor of the New York Times, so a very, very reputable paper, and this man was a very reputable man. This man was called Abe Rosenthal, and he had won a Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. He had reported on things like the Vietnam War. He had reported on major, heavy, hard-hitting news, and people trusted him to know the facts. People came to him with their tips, and one of those people was the New York Police Commissioner. So the two of them were out for lunch together, and the New York Police Commissioner said to Abe, the craziest thing happened. So Abe got one of his journalists on the case, and this journalist was called Martin Gansberg, and I'm quoting from Martin's article. For more than half an hour, 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens watched a killer stalk and stab a woman in 3 separate attacks in Kew Gardens. Twice, their chatter and the sudden glow of their bedroom lights interrupted him and frightened him off. Each time he returned, sought her out and stabbed her again. Not one person telephoned the police during the assault. So Martin Gansberg had talked to people in the area. He'd spoken to people that had been there. He'd spoken to people that had seen something. And a lot of them, the overwhelming statement was, I didn't want to get involved. At least that's the way he reported it. Now, this case haunted people. This preyed on the minds of civilians and police and psychologists for, I do mean literally decades. So psychologists did experiments to prove that this thing was a true phenomenon, and it is. They coined it the bystander effect. And if you imagine, like here, I've got in my hands the responsibility of the everyday person to report something or to help someone they deem to be in trouble. If you share this among 3 people, they've all got a fairly large amount of responsibility and they're more likely to do something. If this is shared among 100 people, they're all less likely to feel that sense of responsibility to help someone. The bystander effect is a real thing, but they also gave it another name, and that's the Genovese syndrome. And that's named after the woman who died. If any of you are already true crime fans, you know what's coming, you know what case this is. So Catherine Susan Genovese was the oldest of 5 children. She had 2 parents and she had a lot of friends, and she even had a dog. People who left her called her Kitty, and after a bit of period trying to find her feet, she'd worked in a few clerical jobs. She discovered that bar work was what she was good at doing for the time. She had other ambitions. She wanted to open an Italian restaurant. So that's what she was doing. She was doing all these double shifts. She was taking on managerial positions and stockpiling her money for this ambition to open an Italian restaurant. She was 28, described as being self-assured beyond her years and having this sunny disposition. So, you know, this friendliness, this confidence probably served her very well as a bar manager, and also just in general in life, because she was gay. And certainly in 1960s New York, that was a very hard thing to be. There was a lot of crimes against gay people. She lived in a flat with her girlfriend called Mary Ann Zialonko, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and their dog. Now, it was 2:30 in the morning on March 13th, 1964. Kitty had driven home from the bar, come home from her shift, and parked up in the car park and got ready to go inside the block of flats. And what she didn't know is she was being watched. And her attacker came up behind her and stabbed her in the back with a hunting knife. Now, she screamed, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, help me." Now, just because she screamed and just because she said he stabbed me, that doesn't necessarily mean that people heard or that people understood what she had said. But people did see that something had happened, and one of the neighbours, Robert Moser, leaned out of the window and yelled at this attacker, "Oi, leave that girl alone!" And he did. He ran. But it wasn't immediately obvious to people that were looking that Kitty was injured and had been stabbed. Maybe people thought that they had interrupted a mugging, and now that the commotion's died down, just carry on with life. Kitty slowly starts to make her way round the back of the building, having been stabbed twice in the back. The problem is the way she was going, the place where she wound up, was not very easily overlooked from a witness point of view. So anyone that's heard this initial shout, hears a shout, probably doesn't immediately assume an attempted murder's going on, and when they look out the window, she's gone. And so they carry on with life. I want to just stop for a second and think, okay? How many times in your life have you ever had to call the emergency services number in your country? I'm calling that police and ambulance and fire brigade. How many times? I'm 37, and yeah, I think about 3 or 4 times. But this was before a national emergency number had even been implemented. At this point, you had to dial O for operator, then they would connect you to your local precinct. And then you'd have to say what you think's happened. Well, I think this woman's been attacked. I'm not really sure. I don't know what's going on. So it's not that surprising that more people didn't pick up the phone. But some people did. Because a 14-year-old boy called Michael Hoffman saw something. He saw a commotion and he's told his dad, Samuel. So the dad, Samuel Hoffman, calls the police and he says, "I think a woman's been beaten up outside. She's kind of been staggering around, but she is on her feet." So he did report to the police, and the police didn't come. So Kitty was alone, bleeding, in an area around the back of the flats, probably in shock, probably suffering from a good amount of blood loss, having tried to get in the door, which was locked. And this is how she was found, not by the police, but by the attacker, because he came back and he looked through the car park, and when he went round the back of the building, there she was in the doorway. And this is when he stabbed Kitty several more times, raped her, stole $49 from her, and then he ran away. Kitty was alive and she fought back because she had what's known as defensive wounds on her hands and wrists. Now, she was also making a lot of noise, but the problem is, because of where she was, neighbours couldn't see her, but they could hear her. And so, another call was made to the police. Finally. Because this man, Carl Ross, is one of the ones that said, "I didn't want to get involved." So instead of calling the police when he looked out the doorway to see this man stabbing his neighbour, and he knew her because he was a guy who gave her her dog, he was a dog groomer, he shut the door and called his friends and asked what he could do, and finally called the police. And while he was doing this, someone else had witnessed something. And she was 4'11". She was a friend of Kitty's, and her name was Sophie Farrer. And little tiny Sophie came out of the apartment blocks and held Kitty. And as the ambulance is coming, she tells her help's on the way. Just repeats it, help is on the way. Now, there was one person who I'm going to name and shame. Joseph Fink is the person who said, well, I thought about getting my baseball bat, but I was tired and I took a nap. That guy, and the cowardly little Carl Ross who didn't want to get involved and called his friends instead of calling for help, they deserve all of the spotlight on them and their apathy and cowardice and just plain douchebaggery. And that's not even a strong enough word. I'm sorry. That's yeah. Now, Kitty died en route to the hospital. The injuries were too severe. But she didn't die alone. And she didn't die with 38 people watching and listening and not caring. She died having been held by someone who did care about her. And there were witnesses, and they did. People did, in their own ways and confusion, try to help using a phone system that was not fully implemented at the time and wasn't even answered by the police. Hell of a different story to what we've been told, right? Why is it that nobody questioned this article at the start? Well, the New York Times and Abe had such an incredible reputation that the smaller paper who read this story and thought something doesn't seem quite right here didn't dare question him. They didn't feel that they had the authority or the reputation behind them to stand against the juggernaut of the New York Times and the Pulitzer Prize winning Abe Rosenthal. And so they stood back. They stood down. And the story perpetuated for years, for decades, with books written on the subject until finally some people started to look into it again a bit more closely. And what they found was that the stories of the witnesses had been taken out of context. Some of them had been exaggerated. Some of the witnesses didn't know what they'd seen. The story of 38 people who mindlessly watched a stabbing and then went back to eating dinner or doing whatever, because it wasn't dinner, it was early hours of the morning, didn't happen. The bystander effect is real, but it didn't happen in this case. Kitty is buried in Connecticut, and even on her memorial website, so many comments talk about the 38 people who watched her die and did nothing. That is how pervasive this lie really is. So who did it? Winston Moseley, who had a clean criminal record and a wife and children, but he was a raping, murdering, nasty bastard. Now, Moseley was sentenced to death. Then the sentence was reduced to life in prison. And around 4 years after being sentenced, he shoved a tin can up his arse, had to go to hospital, got it removed, and used the opportunity to escape, where he went on the run, raped 2 more people, was brought back to prison, and eventually died in prison at the age of 81 after being one of the longest-serving inmates. I think the longest-serving? Yes, one of the longest-serving inmates in the New York State police system. Nice. So let's go on to the next story. Before I start on this story, this video is about the way that insane lies end up becoming part of the public consciousness. This particular story touches on, but does not centre around, trans-related discussion. If you have an opinion on that or want to start a fight, back it up with facts and take it to your governing body, not my comments section, please. When you hear about an urban legend, usually the telltale sign of an urban legend is you never seem to be able to track down a person it really did happen to. You know, it's always, well, my aunt's cousin, or my friend of a friend of a friend of the family, or oh yeah, well, it actually happened in a hospital in Western Australia, but no one actually says it happened here, at this place, this time. Except suddenly, this urban legend, this weird floating story around the internet happened, and it happened in Rye College, East Sussex, England. There had been an argument recorded and put onto TikTok, and the centre of this argument was a pupil at a school and a teacher. And this teacher was absolutely laying into this pupil, saying that her point of view is despicable, and if she really thinks the way that she's claiming she thinks, she needs to go find another school, because she will not tolerate this kind of hatred in her classroom. And what was this hatred? What was actually going on? Well, this other pupil was doubting that there was someone in this school who identifies as a cat. And at this school, they've had to make some special arrangements for this student. They've put some litter boxes in the classroom. And one of the pupils, in a later interview in the newspaper, was saying, well, it's really hard to interact with her because she just meows. So at what point would you start to believe something crazy is happening? Would you believe it when someone you know whose opinion you trust tells you it's happening? What about when the issue is being debated on the national news by psychologists and educational experts and teachers all weighing in very seriously on the major national news networks? What about then? What about if the leader of your country weighs in? A spokesperson for the Prime Minister had to make a statement. And what if you still think that this is some kind of national wind-up, that the Prime Minister is also winding you up? Well, Ofsted ordered an emergency evaluation of the school. They're the authority in school. Your school has to pass an Ofsted inspection. It means that they're checking that the school is up to standard. Ofsted were called in. Now do you believe it? Once this story seemed to have an actual basis in fact, this crazed urban legend, it went everywhere. Around spring to summer 2023, we have got huge debates raging about whether or not a pupil can identify as a cat in a school, and if so, what accommodations should be made for them. How do we address them? How do they pass an exam? That is the situation in the UK being debated on the national news by the major governing bodies of our time. And it didn't happen. So how did we get to this point? It started with a tiny little thing. It started with a litter box. Now, the urban legend that had started to spread in around 2021 started to talk about schools in Michigan, and what they were targeting was making fun of the community of furries, people who, generally adults, not always sexual but often sexual, like to dress up in furry suits. And that seems to be where someone started to make a spoof and a joke about a pupil identifying as a furry and therefore wanting to use a litter box, and then someone has picked it up and gone, I know what we can do, we can use this to poke fun at the trans community, in the same way that when gay marriage was first introduced, people started saying, oh well, what about people going to marry their dogs or marry their tractors, wah, 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 wah. And the whole whataboutism of that seems to be why it has spread like wildfire. But as with all urban legends, there is a tiny grain of truth. Columbine, if you don't know about the Columbine massacre, it was an infamous high school shooting, and in Jefferson County Public School District, where the massacre took place, the governing body started to talk about what they could do in the event of another similar shooting. How could they make pupils comfortable and safe in lockdown? And in the late 2010s, some schools were given buckets of cat litter to use as makeshift toilets in the event of some kind of lockdown situation. How insane and tragic is that tiny little grain of truth? Yes, there are buckets of cat litter in schools for the pupils, but it's not because they identify as a cat. You ended up with really respectable sounding people testifying in the newspapers and in the media saying, we have children in our state, in our country, in our school who have these special measures taken to take care of them because they identify as animals. It's an outright lie. But it's a lie, it's a very versatile sounding lie, which is why people still use it when they want to argue against various different points and arguments relating to trans people. You'll see someone going red in the face and going, oh, there's children identifying as cats in the school, whatever next. It doesn't happen, it isn't happening, it didn't happen. It was described in a very good way by the London Economic Paper. The journalist just described the story as too good to check. Okay, my audio went wonky around this point, so consider this a transition into the third and final case for today. Stella's driving her car. She's stopped for coffee, and while driving her car off way down the road, she sticks the coffee cup between her knees while she's driving, and that cup spills. So, oh crap, she's got coffee down her legs. Ouch. But it's not her fault for the dangerous driving. God no. It's the coffee's fault. It's the coffee's fault for being hot. But you can't sue a cup of coffee. So Stella decides she's going to sue McDonald's. So she sues McDonald's for making hot coffee. You know the Reddit thread, am I the arsehole, where someone tells you a situation and you tell them whether or not they are being the arsehole? Because sometimes it helps to have a whole bunch of strangers tell you whether or not you're being a dick. Well, you know how you like watching someone who's acted like an arse get what's coming to them? Now, the whole world wants to watch as Stella sues McDonald's and will get what's coming to her. And then the completely unexpected happened. They paid her. Why? Where someone is suing you because they spilled their coffee. Because that's not what happened. So let's talk for a second about burns, okay? The outer layer of skin is called the epidermis. A first-degree burn burns that layer of skin. You can just about see I've got a very small scar from a second-degree burn where I caught a hot piece of metal with my arm. But first-degree burn, stick your hand under the hot water. Stick your hand under cold water. Maybe put some ice on it if it's particularly bad. You're going to be fine. Second degree burn goes through the epidermis and into the lower layer of skin, that's the dermis. And the burn site is going to be red, it's going to be blistered, probably swollen, painful. Ouch. You're probably not going to need like proper medical attention. You can take care of it at home, but if it doesn't get better, then you can get some help. Third degree burns are known as full thickness burns. They destroy the outer layer of skin, the inner layer of skin, and they go down to what's called the subcutaneous tissue. The burn site can be either white, blackened, charred. Third degree is bad. This is medical attention level, or probably even hospital. You also can have fourth degree burns, which then also can involve muscle and bone, and because it's gone through the nerve tissue, you've got no feeling. So really, really, really dangerous. Third degree is generally, usually the worst you'll see, unless you've been actually like fallen into a vat of let's not even go there. Keep that in mind about the burns, yeah? Stella Liebeck was a 79-year-old woman who was riding in the car with her grandson. She was not the driver, he was the driver. They went to McDonald's, where she got a cup of coffee. She also got cream and sugar. He parked the car. Stella put the coffee cup, as many people do, between her knees to take the cap off, to add the cream and sugar. And this, in the passenger seat of a stationary car, is when Stella Liebeck dropped the coffee. Just 8 ounces. And it was not just hot coffee, as people claim. It was scalding, giving her second and third degree burns over 16% of her body. And think about the angle. All that coffee straight between her legs. Stella went into shock. She was rushed to the hospital, where she needed skin grafts. Stella was in hospital for a week. That's how bad the burns were. This is not someone that spilled hot coffee, like scalded herself from the kettle. Ouch. No. No, the burns were bad enough to put her in hospital for a week. Now this is America, and the medical bills started to skyrocket. And when those medical bills passed $10,000, that's the point that Stella reached out to McDonald's. With her family, she wrote to McDonald's and said, please, could you first check the temperature of the coffee that you're serving and help me with my medical bills. McDonald's wrote back, and they offered Stella $800 to cover a $10,000 medical expense. And that is when Stella and her family sued McDonald's. And this is where the story started. Woman in car drops coffee, sues McDonald's because it's too hot. No. Stella's lawyers tested coffee they bought all over the city, and every other place served it at least 20 degrees lower than McDonald's. So McDonald's required its franchises for some reason to brew its coffee at 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit and sell it at 180 to 190 degrees. Any liquid at that temperature, if it makes contact with your skin for more than 3 seconds, it will start to burn. Now bear in mind this is a seated 79-year-old woman with burns now between her legs, and bearing in mind her clothes will hold that heat closer to her body. Most people won't be able to jump up, open the door, get down, and then in broad daylight in front of everyone, take off their clothes to try and get it away from their skin. This woman was encased in scalded clothing and in her own scalded skin. And the jurors in the court were shown pictures of what Stella's injuries really looked like. Now, you can Google this. I'm not going to put them here. It's bad. In this court case, it turned out that 700 other people had also been burned from the coffee that McDonald's had been serving at temperatures far exceeding what they were recommended. And that is just the people that complained. That's just the people that actually took the time to write to McDonald's and complain. So there's probably more. Now, McDonald's defence said, no, okay, all right, maybe it's not Stella's fault, okay. But the 700 people, that's a tiny little fraction of the billions of cups of coffee that we sell. And the prosecution are like, are you serious? There's a person behind each one of those numbers. If you watch true crime, you know, in general, if the jury comes to a decision in a fairly short amount of time, you know, it's pretty unanimous, it's pretty clear, right? Well, after 7 days of testimony in this court case, the jurors came to a decision after 4 hours, and they ruled in Stella's favour. Now, when you sue someone, there's 2 different kinds of damages. You've got compensation, which is meant to help you. That's to help like the injured party. And then there's punitive damages, which is like a punishment for the party that caused the problem. So Stella was first awarded $200,000 in compensation. But because it was her fault, technically, then that was reduced to $160,000. And then the time came to punish McDonald's. They awarded her $2.7 million, the equivalent of 2 days of McDonald's coffee sales. McDonald's appealed the decision, because of course they did, and ended up settling out of court. So we don't actually know exactly how much Stella was awarded, but the damage to her reputation was extreme and nasty. They tried to use a smear campaign to get Stella off their back and make Stella a laughingstock. This here is what kills me. People still believe this case. No, I will not take this woman's reputation being ruined for a second longer. This makes me so angry. But you still hear people saying, oh God, yeah, frivolous lawsuits. This woman suing McDonald's because the coffee was hot. You still hear it. The word frivolous lawsuits is entangled with the name of Stella Liebeck, and she did not do anything wrong. And we've still got that snappy line, the McDonald's hot coffee case, and it's still said with this eye roll, but that's not what happened. It's not what happened at all. And how insane is that? So I still have absolutely no idea how to end videos. Thank you so much for watching, and also thank you so much for subscribing. You've given me like this massive boost of confidence after my last video. If you didn't like this video, you want to hear about something else, then stay tuned, because I've got Victorian crime-fighting bodybuilders. If you want to follow me anywhere else, I'm Faith Roswell Official on pretty much everywhere, and I hope you'll be back. I'll see you again soon. I've actually really struggled to film this video. I'm going to have to get better at scripting because I've got like post-it notes of facts and stuff just strewn around in front of me, and I don't want to be someone that constantly is reading off a screen. At the same time, I want to be able to talk to you naturally, but at the same time I've got so many post-it notes in front of me, it's unreal. So next video I will get better at scripting.